But whether it's William Carey, whether it's Hudson Taylor, we look at the lives of men that we respect. We want to see this, and we look at that moment in their life where they've got this influence and people are responding to them, or even in the rearview mirror, people are reading their biographies and they're influenced by it. But what we're unpacking today is, what did it take for that person, that man, to get to that point where they had that kind of voice to speak in that way? They had to live unliked.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the H3X Podcast with Mark Gearing the Great and your co-host Dave Miller. And today we're just going to jump right in and talk about what it's like to live unliked, tough leadership, right? Whenever you're surrounded by people who aren't going in the direction that you're going. And so I want to tee this up, Mark, and just say, the leadership by its very core nature means that I am setting an agenda or creating change in an area where I'm kind of exerting my influence. And what that means is that my mere existence and conversation is saying to other people, you need to change. And that sets you up to be unliked in a lot of relationships. So, hey, what an exciting conversation today. It's super positive, but I say we dive in. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I think this is a great topic to dive into, and 100%. I mean, I think when we talk about leadership, super basic, right? But a leader is somebody who is taking people somewhere, and they have to be going first, doing that, calling people into it. And if they were already going there, then you wouldn't be leading them. So by very nature, leadership means you're taking people from where they are to where they're not, which is going to involve conflict, tough decisions. It's going to involve you not always being liked to get them to that point. So it's a good topic to dive into and talk around. Where do you want to start?
Well, there's this little phrase that I use with my kiddies. I've got a lot of dad like isms that I use with my kids. And one of them is, the truth will set you free, but it'll make you angry first. And And
Yeah.
I say that because that has been my kind of experience in life. In other words, when I'm confronted with a truth that I know is true and that I'm going to have to make significant adjustments, be it for the good or for the bad, like either way, like it could be I'm doing something good and I got to push harder, or it could be
Yeah.
I'm doing something wrong. I need to repent and change, go the right direction. Both of them are going to rattle my complacency. And when I get complacent and I get content and I get on coast, getting shook up makes me angry, because you know that you're going to have to kind of pick up the pieces, change some things, do the thinking, all the things that are required for me to change. And my first response personally to that is always, gosh, right? So I love to change and I'm always about growth, but every single time I've confronted with change, I still have that first response of, oh, right? A
Yeah.
little angry, a little frustrated before I get into the groove.
Yeah. So we've got to be able to have those hard conversations if we're going to lead people somewhere, and that could mean, yeah, like it's going to offend them. So if we're going to lead anybody anywhere, we've got to be comfortable with the fact that we're going to challenge. And that truth, in my experience, Dave, has got to come with vision. We can share hard truth with people, and sometimes the truth is the vision, but we've got to be leading them to something. And we've got to be confident that we're leading them to something and be able to communicate the hard truth they need to hear to get past the obstacle towards that outcome or vision, right?
So, we started this new young professionals group here in Oklahoma City that I kind of mentioned, and for our accountability time, I'm going to take that point, and I got introduced to a tool that's just called Tab, which is, just like any other accountability tool. And in 3/3, sometimes we use maybe fish and follow. Sometimes we use the COST acronym. Sometimes we use the
Right.
GROW acronym. There's a lot of ways you can do it. We're using the Tab acronym, and it stands for what's your takeaway, what's your action item. But then the last two, I think, are super helpful. The first one is, what is your barrier? And the second one is, what is the benefit? And what you're leaning into, I wholeheartedly agree with, because the question is, where are we going? What's the vision? What's the benefit? In other words,
Right.
what's the why behind why I should grind through this change that has everything to do with whether or not this is going to matter? Because in the same way you said, if I go to somebody and I just share a truth and I hit them with it, and I say, you need to change, but they don't understand how that change is going to benefit them or why it matters, then it
Why?
just becomes something that's really kind of annoying rather than something that can become what I would term grace. So, um, just to dive into the thought a little bit, one of the ways in which I perceive the gospel and understand the gospel is sometimes whenever you read, let's say, Hebrews, especially as you get to chapter 12 and it starts talking about the Lord disciplining those whom he loves. And then if the Lord disciplines you, he disciplines you, he's treating you like a son. And because of that, it's showing that you're a part of his family and that you love him. And so the author of Hebrews is saying that we shouldn't spurn the discipline of the Lord, we should welcome it. And
Yeah.
he's describing this whole idea of discipline, of challenge, of change, of the way in which the Lord is pushing us to transform as actually grace. In other words, it's not God's anger towards us that causes him to bring up things. It's his grace because he knows the benefit. In other words, he knows that when we change, it's for our good. And that is actually the grace of the Lord. And so
Yep.
when you take that idea, Mark, and we've got the vision and we do challenge, we actually are being gracious to people in those moments
Right.
and not being hard or mean spirited.
Right.
But that's not always received that way. Just being honest.
The other dynamic there that I would put in the mix, Dave, and maybe this is true in that context you're talking about, but I'll just share the personal example. Right now, one of my leadership areas is with 2 5-year-olds. I have 2 5-year-old boys, and
God bless you.
oh my goodness, I need all the blessing right now. One of them, he is a strong-willed boy, and as he gets older, it's going to come out in some amazing ways. Right now, it translates to him digging in his heels as hard as he can when it's time to get ready to get out the door to school. And so we have been working through this, talking with him, talking with each other. What do we need to do? How much do we need to challenge and discipline? How do we set him up for all the stuff, right? But what the thought that comes to my mind as you're sharing this is, I didn't get to choose what kids I have. I wouldn't choose any other kids, but I didn't get to choose what kids I would get to lead in my life. And there, unless you're really just this high caliber leader that you get to choose who you work with, who you coach, all of those kinds of things. Most of the time, we don't get to choose who we lead. And so we get the ones that God has brought to us. We get to start with that, and then we're entrusted with those leaders. And so when you talk about bringing the truth, bringing the vision, we usually are working with those that God has brought to us to take them from where they are to where they need to move to next. And we don't get to choose who that is in that process.
And the truth of what you're illustrating is that your identity is you are the father of Philip and Andrew.
Yeah.
And that is fact, and that will never change. And that was something that God has given you, and you didn't have a choice in, right? Like, you wanted to be a father.
Right.
And so the father you became, and that identity is core to that whole relationship, because no one else can be Philip and Andrew's father. Only you can, right? Yeah. Only Meg can be their mother. And so you've got confidence that I can still lean into these boys, because the benefit and the growth and the change and the experience that you know they're going to need based upon your own experience, your own growth, your own maturity as a grown man, makes you go, it's okay, boys, if you don't like me in this moment.
Yes.
Because I know that this moment matters for years down the road that you can't yet see.
That's right.
And when we're leading, the only way we can really lead when we're in relationships, where in moments, and sometimes in relationships, sometimes in extended seasons where we're not that liked, is if we have that identity and that confidence that says, I know what I'm supposed to do, and I know how I have to help you get to where you're going.
That's right.
Otherwise, when people get obstinate with us, we'll just be like, man, I'm bowing out. I don't have to put up with this. And that's a lot of the reasons why relationships and leadership breaks down, is because we go, man, I don't have to deal with this. I don't deserve this. And that's an identity thing where we're saying, listen, I'm not committed to this. But to really get in, especially when it comes to the head, heart, and hands of the multiplying church and our leaders, if we make it through those rocky seasons, that those relationships become really good relationships that are going to have long-lasting impact.
And I think that's one of the decisions that we have to make, is what our role, well, we have to make / God calls us to it, but what our role is going to be in the kingdom context that we're talking about today and on this podcast is, are we going to be a developer of people? Because there's a way in which you can lead where you're just getting something started and identifying these high capacity leaders that are already out there and slotting them in. You're more managing what the work is. But if you're going to
Right.
be what we're talking about today. We're kind of assuming that. But if you're going to be that kind of leader that's a developer of people, I see Jesus doing that. He takes some guys that are otherwise ragtag, disqualified, and he develops them. That means that he's got to make the decision that he's going to work with these guys where they're at in their character, where they're at in their sin issues, say hard things, not be liked, and lead them through some hard conversations. We got to embrace those conversations is the bottom line if we're going to be a developer of people.
And even in Jesus's relationship with his disciples, it's interesting that he's got this crowd of people that are around him and he's got some followers. And the 12 that he chose weren't the only 12 that were following him around. And he prays, and the Father says, these are the 12. And then he comes back down after an entire night of prayer and he says, these are going to be my apostles. And so even in the relationship that Jesus had, I think that the Father is telling him, these are the boys that are going to be chosen. And like it or not, up, down, indifferent, these are the 12 that we're going to make happen. And at that point, when Jesus leans into those relationships and those guys lean back into that relationship with him, he's made that identity commitment that these are the guys. And knowing even one that's going to betray him, he's training and teaching and preparing one to fulfill a scriptural role that's going to cost him his life. Like, that's some serious identity commitment and obedience at that point to develop people in the way that they should be. And to your point, fundamentally in the church, we are in the people business. And in the business world, there might be certain areas where you're going to have people hop on the team and hop off the team based upon skills. Like, if I'm an IT person and you have no idea how to run computers, well, you're not going to fit. And a skill's going to bounce you off. But in the church world, we're developing people and we're giving them the skills that they need, because every person needs to be a priesthood in the kingdom, which means we can't bow out as much.
Well, I think I hear you saying this, Dave, but I just want to give you space to just hammer it away a little more. But when we framing up this topic, we're talking about what does it mean to learn to live unliked. You brought in this piece of how critical that is for me in the relationship with my sons, Andrew and Philip, to lean into my identity. What else would you counsel or suggest around that place of learning to live unliked?
Well, the second real big piece of it, Mark, though, besides just the identity, is that once we get that identity, to stay true to moving towards what we know we ought to do, even as everybody else in the world is telling us to do something different. Everybody is wanting to tell you what to do. I have another dadism that I use with my kids. Nobody ever really quits. They just start doing what somebody else wants them to do. And in leadership, when we quit leadership, we don't quit. We just start following somebody else's direction. And if we believe in what we're doing and we know the vision, because that's the piece that I'd bring is not only identity, but Mark, you clued us into vision. We've got to know where we're going. And one of the biggest hindrances to living unliked is if I'm not confident in where we're going and why it matters, I won't be able to live unliked as a leader. I would love for you to speak into how important vision has been for you, even in the hard times of New York. Like, how has what God called you to do and where you're going in New York helped to define who you are and build your confidence in why you do what you do?
You and I were talking about some of that just real specifically here in New York. So thanks for teeing that up. But I think I've taken time as I've been here to start with what is the plan, what is the strategy, and begin to execute on that, and then come up against hitting some walls. And then in the midst of that, I've had a lot of different opportunities, to your point, to say, okay, well, am I going to just adopt what I see other people doing here in this context? Am I going to be willing to live in the uncertainty of the moment? Get some outside counsel. I had a lot of different things go through my mind. And so what began to happen as I began to just ask some other people, hey, what are you doing? What are you learning? And then I had a moment where it's like, maybe I should be doing what other people feel like they are called to do in this context. Right. But realizing, no, actually God has spoken some really clear things, and I see the need of what it's going to take. Going back to that concept of what you're bringing in, Dave, we use that acronym a lot of WIG take. What's it going to take? I went back to that of saying, what do I see it's going to take? Not just what other people have said in other contexts. There's some pioneering that needs to happen here. what do I think it's going to take? And that's brought me to some convictions, and then trying on some best practices and strategies to implement, and growing confidence that this is what we're gonna commit to over a season, and then be willing to adjust if it's not working. But we need to be able to commit for a season and say, okay, this is the vision I'm chasing after. This is what I'm going to do, even if it's not what other people are doing. I'm not going to shift to do what they're asking me to do.
And what's interesting about leadership is that creates a very lonely kind of environment sometimes, because if you're living unliked in multiple areas of your life,
Right.
then that also means that you feel like you don't have good connection relationships for seasons. But those aren't going to last forever. And what is interesting is that if we just keep plowing, we just keep pushing with an open mind, we're not going to keep doing it because we think it's right and it's not right. It's not working. We never change. That's not what we're talking about. What we're saying is we're growing, we're adapting, we're going after what it is we're called to do. What ends up happening is that then there comes a point to where you start getting liked as a leader, and you might get a little credibility, and people start like wanting to know what you think, and then maybe you get a little influence, and then you go into a whole new set of traps, right, as a leader that can cause you problems. But when you get to that point as a leader where you get a little credibility, maybe people start asking you what you think or whatever, it's nice to go, okay, but behind all that is a long time of just knowing that you ground it out. And I think that's super helpful for humility in terms of leadership, because when we do go through that and people go, how did you get so confident in what you were doing? The answer is because I failed so many times and looked stupid for so long trying to believe in and know that what I was doing was right, but not being liked, really not being understood, all those things, that whenever I finally got there and I'm like, no, I'm convictionally here, you get, you get a little, I don't want to use the word obstinate, but confident that this is what we should do, right? And you don't want to lean off of it too much because you had to pay such a high cost to get to that point.
Yes, that's right.
And I think that's when that credibility line really starts to raise up, is whenever you get that confidence of vision along with the identity through experience and hard knocks that just says, no, I know this is what we should be doing. People pick up on that. They really do pick up on that. And the unlikeness starts to turn into some, they honor, respect. And at that point, you can speak. And whenever you get credibility and you get respect, you can speak hard truths in a way that may frustrate people. But that credibility is both truth plus vision accepted together. Yeah. And when you get to that place, then you can really start seeing transformation and change in people because they are confident in what you're saying.
Man, it's so needed, this point of this conversation, to those who've listened this far into this podcast. It's like, this is so needed because we have all of these heroes or examples around us. They're in the Word. But whether it's William Carey, whether it's Hudson Taylor, we look at the lives of men that we respect. We want to see this, and we look at that moment in their life where they've got this influence and people are responding to them, or even in the rearview mirror, people are reading their biographies and they're influenced by it. But what we're unpacking today is, what did it take for that person, that man, to get to that point where they had that kind of voice to speak in that way? They had to live unliked. They had to have a clear vision of where they were going, call other people through some truth towards that vision, probably have a lot of hard conversations. I know for sure, we talk about Hudson Taylor. Nobody was doing missions the way that he was. Nobody was going into the interior. Nobody was doing what he was doing. He had to call.
No one was dressing like the Chinese and cutting their hair.
Yes. Yeah, right. So he had to call people to a different vision, speak some hard truth, live unliked, to call them to this thing that hadn't been done, that then became normalized. And everybody's like, well, yeah, how do you do that? And they want to learn from that. So this is helpful to dig into that behind the scenes for what that looks like to have that confidence.
Yeah, to your point, I think if Hudson Taylor was alive today and everybody was like, oh, Hudson Taylor, I want to tell me what you learned. Tell me who you are. Tell me what you think. He'd probably be like, what? You want to, what? Nobody wanted to listen to me most of my life. What are you guys talking about? How did I become popular?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably true. And the truth is that when we look at the stories like that, maybe David Livingston or any of those biography stories, George Mueller, I mean, we could just go
Yeah,
through a list
right.
of those guys, Jonathan Edwards, like, right, let's just keep naming them. But I think what happens is, to your point, is that we almost want to jump to the credibility as a leader instantly. And that credibility just takes a lot of relational work, a lot of hard
Yes.
knocks, a lot of failures, a lot of learnings, and really just staying the course. Because
Staying the course. There
credibility
it is.
credibility comes from the fact that you're still doing it when no one else is, and you were
That's it.
doing it when no one else was, and you're still doing it even though everybody else has got on board. And that is what brings credibility. You and I both have been highly influenced by Chuck Wood. And
Yeah.
I think as a contemporary modern example of somebody that we could call out in this and say, man, here's a guy who we love and respect. And the reason we love and respect him is because this guy has been doing it for decades. Like, and he's got fruit to show for it. And he's, even with his illness and the debilitating condition that he has as his health is going downhill, he's married, he's still living out his family life, he's still teaching the word, and it may not be the way he wants to do it, but he's taking his situation, circumstances, and he's still using it to make disciples. And that's why Chuck has credibility, is because Chuck's been doing the thing, and he's been doing it faithfully for decades.
Good point. Yeah.
So living unliked as leaders, maybe not the most exciting concept today, but I think when what we're saying, you got to have the identity, you got to have the vision. And when identity and vision get years of experience and just stay in the course, then credibility comes. And when that credibility comes, the truth with the vision together, you can have more influence and more say. And some of those hard truths that used to run people off starts to attract people. And you just got to walk through it. You just got to be somebody who lives unliked for the sake of what you're really trying to get done.
Thanks for listening, for watching. If this content has been helpful for you, please take a minute to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us to get this content out there farther, to serve Jesus, grow his kingdom, and accomplish the Great Commission until there is no place left. Much love to you guys. See you next time.